Okay, so thank you everyone for coming out today, and thank you for those of you watching online. I'm Summer Bias. I'm the curator here at the museum. So before we get started, I have just a couple announcements. The first is please take a second to silence or turn off your phone so we don't have any disruptions. As far as the museum goes, we are nearing our grand opening. And that'll hopefully be in late February or early March, so keep an eye out for updates on that. And we have a new scavenger hunt called Mystery, Murder, and Mayhem to guide you through the darker side of the island's history. So these kits are $15 and they can be reserved until February 26th at 4 p.m. Contact Thea Seagraves to reserve your kit, and her card is at the bar if you need her contact information. Our upcoming programs in recognition of Black History Month, our February 3rd on 3rd will be with Shannon Browning Mullis from the Owens Thomas House and Slave Quarters, which is a historic house in Savannah, Georgia. She's going to be talking about their efforts to include the stories of people enslaved at the house into the museum's narrative. So this is on February 19th at 6 p.m. And then our March Brown Bag Lunch will be with Mary Duffy from the Amelia Island Sea Turtle Watch. She's going to be talking about what her organization does, as well as the upcoming sea turtle nesting season. So that's a little preview for the upcoming programs, but today we have Dr. Erwin Wunderlich. Dr. Erwin Wunderlich is an award-winning Florida historical fiction novelist, a children's book author and illustrator, and a retired naval officer. His newest novel, Drummer Boy on the Run, a Civil War treasure novel, is a fictional account of how Richmond's treasure made it to Florida in 1865. For the last several years, Erwin's love for history and illustration has extended to his creating and collecting Scrimshaw items, for which he is the recipient of multiple art awards. So everyone please welcome Erwin Wunderlich.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Ms. Bias and the museum for having me. Certainly an honor to be here. I hope you'll pick up some info on Scrimshaw and maybe how to create, honor, preserve this history that the Scrimshaw has produced over the years. This is my contact information. Some of my passions are here. I write Florida fiction books, all of them historical fiction, and I have 2 Civil War novels concerning Florida and 3 children's Florida fiction books. They're all on Amazon. Some of my other passions is Scrimshaw. The Florida Strawberry Festival is going to take place in March next month, and I'll try to enter some artwork in the Strawberry Festival coming up. Also do beekeeping out on the little farm that I have. So in today's talk, try to convey what is Scrimshaw, where did it come from, why was it popular, how do you produce Scrimshaw these days, minus ivory due to loss. This is just a little artwork that I drew, but since I illustrate children's books, I find it easy to illustrate tiles and other illustrations. But what's always appealed to me of this, it took me a while to learn that it's a simple thing to do. You don't necessarily have to have art skills. You need patterns, and I don't need any electricity. That's a really nice thing. I can just take my little wooden box around and do wherever I'm at. I can do Scrimshaw. I can produce it on a fossil material, on seashells or high-grade plastics that they offer nowadays in the say in Home Depot for your countertops. But simple. The simple idea of doing it nowadays is what's really appealed to me. Even though I do, yes, I illustrate books. Okay, here's some of the early Scrimshaw items that are whale's teeth. Okay, they're in President Kennedy's library. His wife would give him a Christmas present that would be something here that, and then eventually he passed away, obviously, died, and it was donated to his presidential library. So you'll see a lot of Scrimshaw, early Scrimshaw in his library. And obviously it's a nautical-based scenes in the early 1800s when whale's teeth were scrimshawed. But if you can picture what it was like back in the early 1800s, whaling ships would go out in the North Atlantic for, say, 5 years. They would be out there for 5 years and trying to harvest whales for the blubber, if you will, because they needed a way to have whale oil in their lanterns, so that they were out there year after year after year harvesting whales. And then eventually Scrimshaw had been done on non-whale materials in the mid-1700s. It kind of moved over into the whale's teeth now with all the whaling going on. So oftentimes the sailors in their free time, because they might go for a month without seeing a whale. So they had a lot of free time, and they would be carving Scrimshaw, and when they got into port, they might trade you this for whatever, alcohol, whatever, once they made port. And then sooner or later it gets to President Kennedy's library. So that's kind of a little bit on the history. Now, when it came time of the Civil War, that's what I write about so much, there was blockading going on, and ships were attacking ships. The whaling industry was severely curtailed during the Civil War. It shrank big time, and it really never recovered after the Civil War in the 1860s. But it did move to the Pacific Ocean, where harvesting of whales kind of continued. By the 1970s, whales and elephant ivory, elephant ivory were no longer legally able to be imported into the U.S. due to laws. So there's a little of the history. So it is a scribing or scratching process, inking, add ink into the scratch, done on various materials. In the early 1800s, the sailor might use ink from a squid, the whale's tooth, shark skin to polish the tooth, and their sailor's knives to etch the tooth. By now, we have to use what's called non-ivory India ink, which I get at any of the Michaels or any, a cleaner and a sharp knife nowadays. A little more on history. These aren't obvious. These are a little different than the last slide you saw from President Kennedy's library. This is sailor's snuff box. And you can see the size relative to a quarter. It's just a few inches, and it has a hinge and right here, and it opens up. But it's been Scrimshaw in a nautical manner. It has the compass here. And it comes from the late 1700s. So it's a cow horn, basically, that opens up and shuts and is sealed at both ends. So another different kind of Scrimshaw. If the men had this, the ladies might have their mirror. So the old-fashioned, what they call these pocket mirrors nowadays, and they're about 3 inches tall. And the mirror was on a hinge and it would open up and shut. This came out of a Florida museum, which I subsequently purchased. So I'm saying, hey, maybe it came from Fernandina. A rich lady in Fernandina used to have this. It's an 1847 pocket mirror. So obviously Fernandina was one of the major early American seaports. And so I was really thrilled to be able to buy this. So more antiques, basically. You might run across antiques like this wherever you might. So we have somewhat fashionable utilitarian Scrimshaw pieces that are antiques now over the decade and centuries. Any comments on the antique side of Scrimshaw, where it came from? Yes.
What material is the ladies' one?
It's a good question. I think it's bone. I think it's bone material. And very thin, it slides open. And it would have had a glass mirror inside, just like glass here. And in those years, they would add some reflective silver powder or whatever to reflect off the glass for the mirror. But the powder and the mirror itself have long since disintegrated. In most of these antiques, you don't ever find the mirror. But 1847 is Scrimshaw on the back side of this mirror.
Wow. You said that the sailors use knives to do this.
Yes.
When you look at how fine it is,
yes.
How in the heck do you use a knife?
I have 20/20 or better. You have to have, I have another slide here that kind of, okay, this is some of the, now these are also antiques, okay? Here is a genuine Civil War ink bottle. Okay, so we're talking about ink, squid ink in there with a turkey feather to draw it out. And this is over 100 years old, a Scrimshaw tool. And you can see, if you see these in the antique shops, this is the shape you're looking for. And somewhat of a good point, a short point, where the Scrimshaw person could scratch the item. But yes, good eye, you had good eyes. And then add the ink and go from there. So the ink bottle would have a cork on the top, and anyways, I do collect those kinds of antiques too. And if you run across those, definitely, they're not, they're collectible basically. Nobody knows what they are, but you will in the future if you see it. Beautiful wood sometimes, very nice. We can move on to modern. Okay, these are the old days. Here's some new. I have this little, if I will call it a farm near Gainesville, and I have some planted items, some citrus and some plants like rosemary. I have a little rosemary out there, But I have a lot of woods on the property, and so I have a lot of deer and turkey and coyotes and whatever on my farm. And if you understand the way antlers are come and go, every year the deer shed their antlers. The antler falls off, and usually the coyotes grab it and chew on it, and the deer regrows the horn for the next year. So in March and April that happens. The shedding in Florida happens. So out there on the farm, I like to, okay, let's see if I can collect these antlers. These deer are everywhere on the farm all the time. But not only will the coyotes chew on them, but the mice will attack the tip of the antler, and you'll start to see where the mice are eating. Anyways, so I like to do this out there and grab these antlers, try to use the antlers. I don't think you'll see this on any Scrimshaw talk, but so the way I put this corn thing out here. The male deer puts his head down in March and April, and it kind of knocks his horn to the ground. And I keep an eye on things. I go out there and look.
That's sneaky.
I collect it. Yeah. So it's a kind of a cheap way or available way to collect. And then I'm going to have to, if that's not a deer antler up on the countertop by the sign-in, but it's an antler. I'm going to have to polish the area that I think I want to scrimshaw on, and then actually scratch in a picture of another animal or onto the antler. So this is kind of a new way that I've noticed I can gather materials to scrimshaw on the farm. And there's a process to scrimshaw. Let's see here. I have to go, like you mentioned, I have to plan what is the pattern, what is if I want to do an alligator, an egret or something. I have to find the sketch that I'm trying to do. I have to get the material, the antler or whatever, to etch on. Now the material might be an antler or corian, which is this. This is called corian in Home Depot. Okay, it's a kitchen countertop item, and it can be scrimshawed, which there's some examples back there. So I have to have the material, and then I have to match the sketch to the 2 inches or whatever, however big I'm going to scrimshaw on. So I do my planning. I might have a computer for that. But now I'm going to go non-electric. I'm going primitive to prepare my antler, polish it to some extent, put that glue the pattern or however onto the material. So I can glue it right onto here. And then I need to scratch the material. I need to etch the alligator onto the material with a very sharp knife. Then I need to peel off the pattern and the glue and clean it up and put the ink in. Then it will usually not look very attractive. Yeah, I'll see a few black lines, and it looks almost like an alligator. I'm going to have to repeat the alligator, scratching the alligator again and again and again until it looks really like an alligator on the material. And then I date the piece. So that's the scrimshaw. I did a piece like this. I think it's back on one of those tiles where the alligator is jumping. And then finally you enjoy the artwork or however and protect it. I usually put paste wax. I mean, people probably haven't heard of paste wax since we were teenagers, but we used to go out there and polish our cars faithfully. Our first car that we ever bought, put that paste wax on there. It looks so good. The paste wax to protect it in the future. And you can enter it in contests or whatever you want to do to enjoy it. Yes?
And just go a little deeper into how you apply the ink, and because I'm thinking we put the ink on there and then clean off the excess, how to keep from cleaning off your artwork.
See if I can go back to the ink. Okay, we don't want to let the ink sit out in the air because it dries up, so we want wet India ink. Black. You could use colors, white. You could, if you had a black horn or red or blue, but I use black India ink. I'm going to draw it out with say a Q-tip. So a minor amount of material. I put the Q-tip in, bring the Q-tip out, and start putting the Q-tip onto the scratch, the alligator. So then I make sure I seal at the bottom because I don't want the ink to dry. And I'm going to use it's almost like an old-fashioned, way we used to polish our shoes. My dad was so faithful about polishing his shoes every Sunday. And you kind of have a rag and you're kind of wiping off the unwanted black that you don't want. So I just, a little bit of liquid on the cloth diaper rag or whatever, and if you use too much water, the ink will all disappear. You'll have to start over. So a tiny bit of water, a little baby's diaper, and wipe all the bad ink off, and you'll find what stays is the scratch ink. So then you do it, you scratch it again, ink it again, scratch it again, ink it again. And then you're done. You'll be paste waxing, using the old wax, the yellow wax, to do the final polish with a different rag to make it look clean. One danger is when you have like a fossil or a seashell, that it's not manufactured, that you may leave ink in an old scratch. The animal had an old scratch on it, and you don't know it, but you put new scratches, so then the ink migrates into the old scratch and stays. So the paste wax will do a good job to try to remove unwanted black. So the paste wax not only preserves, but it also might remove unwanted black that is in your fossil, your seashell. Good question. See if I can go back to the modern. Enjoying your artwork. So here's some just some samples of some Scrimshaws that I've done, and I put the quarter in to make sure you get an idea of how big are these. They're all very tiny. So egret there, and these are both plastic, high-grade modern plastics, little ovals, about the size of a quarter, a ship. And then I started into some fossil material that I have. And they're all relative to the quarter, the deer I mentioned earlier on a fossil. And of course, I think it looks better in person over there if you see it. And then the squirrel. I like to do squirrels. I found out squirrels are really nice. They look good when everything's done. On another piece of fossilized material. I've never tried it, but fossilized, you have that around here, megalodons, or the shark's teeth, basically. I've never tried it, but I've heard you can use Scrimshaw on fossils with old shark's teeth. All right, but this is artificial material. This is the Corian tile. And so I thought I'd just run through here. I don't know how we're doing on time, but yeah, good. So I'd be sitting watching a college football game, and I'll just Scrimshaw something while I'm watching the football game. A lot of people, they go to Scrimshaw classes running right now, coming up in Brasstown, North Carolina, and the students are in there scrimshawing, and the instructor is watching and teaching. But there's all this 1960s music blasting for the whole Monday through Friday. So yes, you can watch a college football game and do something like this. But anyways, I'll start with the top one. This is all some of Florida history. So here we are, loving Florida history. I'll let you see if you can tell me. We're going to just go across. Well, what Florida history is this woman? Does anybody know? This woman is a little clue back there. The yearling.
Yeah. What's her
Marjorie Rawlings.
Marjorie Rawlings.
All right, got that one. Marjorie Rawlings writes the yearling. Of course, and this one's probably not a history, but natural history. An alligator reaching for a heron, and which drops its fish, which is all on the 2-inch. There's some Civil War pictures here. Anybody know anything about these gentlemen in the Civil War, Florida Civil War? Judah P. Benjamin, the Secretary of War and Secretary of State for the Confederacy, who escaped at the end of the Civil War. He escaped through Florida. And Robert Gamble was where he escaped to, Robert Gamble's mansion near Bradenton, where I grew up. So we have the Gamble Mansion, which is today a state park. If you're over in Bradenton, go to see it. But it was an 1865 hideout for the Secretary of State, who was thought to have been, at the time, everybody was after him. They wanted Judah P. Benjamin because they thought he had assassinated President Lincoln as a Secretary of State. That's what Secretaries of States do, right? They do naughty stuff. All right, so he is escaping. He hides out in the Gamble Mansion. Here's, of course, you know who this is. Cotton. Abraham Lincoln freeing the slaves who were harvesting cotton, typically in Florida. And we move over to another Scrimshaw of conquistadors. And 500 years ago in Florida with their crossbow. And of course, we all know who this is in Florida. Chief Osceola. Osceola County, Florida. Captured under a flag of truce by the United States Army. J.J. Dickinson, you probably don't know J.J., but J.J. was a Jacksonville, he's buried in Jacksonville, but he was a terror in the North Florida area during the Civil War. If you were in the Swanee Valley and you were wearing a blue uniform, you were in trouble because JJ was going to be after you. He had 200 men on horses. So he would respond to wherever the Union Army came into Florida. J.J. Dickinson. Another Indian scene, Indians shooting the wild hog with a bow and arrow. Sure you didn't notice that. And this piece of artwork is one of the earliest artworks that is known to exist in Florida. Have you ever seen this picture here. It was about 500 years ago that a Spanish artist drew this picture of Florida. And thank goodness you can still see it today, but it's the earliest depiction of what's Florida is. And the artist drew it with a number of deer that look like elk. And it's possible there could be elk in Florida in those years. Not anymore. But they literally look like European deer. And they also have an Indian that's hiding under the skin of one of the deer. So I said, well, okay, I'll do that. So Scrimshaw, the earliest Florida historical scene that's in existence. So this is a 1591 drawing, Spanish drawing. So that's some Florida history there, maybe. And this is kind of adds to, well, if I do this in my book, one of my children's books, certainly I can do it on one of these tiles, the Chief Osceola. So that's kind of how I moved from one venue to the other venue, if you will, shown in this picture. Thanks to my mother who got me when I was 8 years old. I would go down Saturday morning in Bradenton to the learn art. She wanted to teach me how to do oil painting, carving, sculpting. Thanks to my mom, I kind of have always enjoyed drawing, but you don't have to have drawing skills to do Scrimshaw. Again, we're going towards a pattern, not creating something out of the clear blue. Yes?
Is this ever done on other materials like wood or leather?
You do see people talking about Scrimshaw on wood.
Not leather or...
And maybe then you would hear them talk about Scrimshawing on leather too, but it's really, the idea is kind of on living animal material, pretty much, bones and antlers and the like. I can't imagine how if I put ink on a scratched wood and I tried to wipe it off with a baby diaper that would just smudge around. I don't know. Because that's what I do. You see that? I'm Scrimshawing on wood in front of the TV set. And if I accidentally spill ink on there, it's hard to get off. Anyways, good question. But again, the simplicity of this scratching process is what has always appealed to me.
So how long does it take you, let's say the one that you have circled, how long did it take you to complete?
Oh, that's just a football game.
Yeah. Oh, yeah?
A couple hours. Yeah, and again, it's primitive, non-electric. I do need some good lighting, but so that's kind of Scrimshaw. Where did it come from? Again, the whaling industry kind of popularized it. Really put it on the map as an art form, and it is an American art form. It was the American whaling industry that put this on the map to where we are today. So it's an original American art form which had popularity to it. And how would you do it today? In a similar primitive way with a little wooden box and some knives and ink and rags. And yes?
When assuming you've got the pattern, you said you take the pattern, you glue it on the material. What do you use? Just an Elmer's glue or something?
Just a rubber glue, rubber cement.
Rubber cement.
Old fashioned like in elementary school.
And then you take that off with what?
When you wipe it off with your little liquid and your diaper, it'll come.
So you don't use like a gum out or glue gun?
No, it'll just come right off. Just peels. That rubber cement just very friendly, I guess. to remove. Any other questions or comments?
Have you heard any evidence that native Arctic peoples ever did any scrimshaw?
Again, it moved from the North Atlantic over to the Northern Pacific, and today the Eskimo, those Indians in Alaska, they still try to keep it going. They have a modern version of scrimshaw. They scrimshaw an Eskimo in a kayak and going through the ice, and it's kind of cute. It's definitely Alaskan and Eskimo in. So good for them. And they have, I don't know what exemption, I don't think they have any exemptions on laws.
I think they use walrus bones.
He's a lower.
So they
can hunt them, right? I mean, they still.
Yeah, I think they could probably legally hunt the walruses because of their status as Indians.
Yeah, they can. I was thinking
Yes.
historically, but then
Okay.
because they would have had access to lots of tusks and teeth, but
Today they do.
Maybe they didn't
Yes.
have access to an ink or something.
Right. So no, it really had to make its way over in the late 1800s over to the Pacific for them to, well,
To take up.
could we do the same thing that the people in the Atlantic were doing? And then they use their out in the outdoors and they're natural. They're always harvesting like walruses and whatnot to then apply the scrimshaw to the way they live, and then sell it to tourists or when you go on the Alaskan cruises after the pandemic, which are wonderful, by the way. So yeah, to see how they do it, it's really nice. But it's kind of the late 1800s. It's not. It started in the Atlantic Ocean side, Scrimshaw. Yes.
How does it work with the laws against selling ivory?
It's a
that
very.
that you watch on Antiques Roadshow and things like that, and they have it on there. So are there exceptions for?
I don't know how these people, like someone dies and someone had this they donated it to this museum, or how all that works. I think you need to consult with like a jeweler or somebody who probably has a license to move ivory from one state to another state in a legal manner. So if you were faced at, you had in a state somebody died and you inherited something, and then you say, well, now what do I do with this? I'd either go to a museum, or maybe they have the wherewithal to ship it to another museum, and then that museum can get it to your grandchildren up in New Hampshire. Or, I don't understand, but interstate commerce in ivory is illegal to the Joe citizen.
Because we have like a small collection of antique Navajo artifacts.
Okay.
And with the laws on eagle feathers and things like that, you better know what you're doing, or you'll end up in prison.
And there's probably I won't be a conspiracy guy, but there's probably people that are trying to catch you doing something illegal out there. Would you like to buy this? Probably not. Yeah. Probably not. But there are legitimate people that inherit something that have to figure out, what do I do with it now? And I would say go to a jeweler or go to an antique person that may be able to transport it somewhere or buy it from you, or in your own state.
Or donate it to us here.
Yeah, right, if they would use it here. But yeah, you'll run into that more often than not.
Ivory, you can get it certified, just like, before they banned it or whatever, but you're gonna pay big money to have that happen, right? It's not like they're just gonna, I don't know if they have to take a little piece of it and test it to see when the animal died
How
or
old was
whatever,
it?
but yeah, I mean, now the Navajo thing, I don't know, that's another story, right? Because that's like Egyptian artifacts. They're all having to go back to Egypt now, right? I don't know if the Navajo Indians want their stuff back or not, but
I have a story.
Ivory and that kind of thing. I mean, I have a whale's tooth that was my father's that he got someplace, and I've always wondered
What do you do
what the
with it?
legality of owning that thing is.
It's tricky too. I know people call their state game and freshwater fish commission in Florida to say, well, is this legal? What can I do with this? And in one case, I've heard a story of in North Carolina recently. North Carolina North Carolina's trying to restore their elk population. To allow them to restore elk in the state of North Carolina, they've had to make it illegal to transport elk parts out of state or in. They have laws that they've set up that are very recent and very unusual in my mind in Florida. So you better not take an elk antler from into North Carolina or try to sell or buy an elk antler from somebody up in North Carolina. So the laws are, call the State Game and Fish Commission if you're not really sure about some animal that might be somewhat out of going extinct or being restored, or you're just really not sure about that animal, or some historic elephants or whale. Call a Game and Fish, talk to antique dealers, jewelers who probably know a lot about transport of these items.
Mr. Google probably has the right answer.
Don't be careful. There's probably scamsters out there.
No, I'm saying if you wanted to research who to contact or what to do with.
Got to have a reputable
stuff,
person to contact. So, good question. And a question that comes up all the time. Anything else? Yes.
I've got a question from the live stream that says, are there people in the area that appraise antique Scrimshaw?
I've been asked that question too. I don't know. A lot of times you'll see Scrimshaw, if you see it at a convention, this is another way to talk about transport. If you see a knife convention, like collectors of knives, you'll see Scrimshaw on the knife handle. So go to the show, to ask them your question about purchase or movement of your antique that you inherited. So hopefully that, I would say the same thing to the question there. Think about going to a knife show, and a lot of times at those I've seen similar shows. I was at a Civil War show a few weeks ago up in Charleston, which was a kind of a one-of-a-kind thing that they just restarted after the pandemic. And sure enough, they had an appraiser table there and hundreds of Civil War vendors selling things. But yes, they had an appraiser sitting right there. If you had some unknown from your grandmother, bring it in there, well, they'll look at it and appraise it. The same thing might happen at a knife show, where you see kind of exclusively Scrimshaw at the knife show, and they might have the antique appraiser at the show. Go to the Tallahassee show or the Jacksonville knife show, or when they restart after the pandemic. So, but there's a lot of collectors. Obviously, they're anxious to get back to their collecting in 2021. Good question. Yes.
I just want to ask you, and for the benefit of anyone else here, have you ever been to the Peabody Museum in Salem, Massachusetts?
No.
They have the most gorgeous collection of Scrimshaw there.
Wow.
Because the whole museum is based on the era of whaling in Salem and Boston and New Bedford. And you could I've spent a day there just looking at it. The china from China, and they have this fabulous collection of Scrimshaw there. In case anyone's up in Boston is interested, it's a beautiful museum.
Good tip there. Have to undo all this, but thinking back to the old days of production of, there you go, production of these items using these tools. And the artwork that you might see at the museum.
Yeah, it's amazing. If anyone is near Salem, Massachusetts, it's definitely worth a visit for that era of time. Is what they focus on, the whaling years.
A big
Whaling and
proliferation.
China trade, those two things.
Well, thank you for that tip. So yes, and I had some references, and I'll have to go back to the other direction. If you are interested in trying it yourself or learning more, the schools are restarting after the pandemic. I know the Brasstown school here will be teaching it this year. They have a good teacher. I know the gentleman up at the folk school, and they'll teach you anything. Quilting, banjo making, banjo playing, dancing, folk skills, and you can learn them this year up at the folk school if you want to learn Scrimshaw. And the other school, William Holland School in Young Harris, will reopen eventually, and they'll teach Scrimshaw also. So both of those are fairly close to here if you want to learn. The YouTube, if you look at YouTube, because we all use YouTube, especially during the pandemic, to learn things, but the Scrimshaw videos are very advanced. They play a lot of music, and all of a sudden the guy has a wonderful Scrimshaw of a mermaid. Hey, you saw a lot of wonderful music, and he's doing this, and a little too advanced probably. YouTube doesn't seem to do it, but the in-person school, Monday through Friday, is good. So anyways, that's kind of, if you have interest in that. So any other questions related to Scrimshaw? I have some items there. I have my books that I wrote, and I'm writing a new book about Fernandina, Civil War Fernandina. If you have any good Civil War Fernandina stories, let me know. The next novel will be Civil War here. Yes.
So you had your tile on a piece of wood and you were carving it at your football game.
Yeah.
I mean, so why doesn't it slide around? I mean, does it?
Good question. You know, a lot of people want to contain the item that you're carving on because it'll slip when you pressure it. And they make a 2" by 2" piece of wood that has a hole in it, and the wood just kind of holds everything together. Or they.
So what about if you're doing like an antler? Do you hold that in your hand with a
Yeah,
leather
you've
glove
got
kind of
to
thing and just
deal with it.
Yeah.
It's one hand doing I'm left-handed, doing the carving. The other hand maybe have to hold it still so you don't make a mistake. And I use a bean bag. I don't know if you would not necessarily call it a bean bag. It's a leather bag that's full of rice, and so it's like a bean bag, and the antler will depress into it and kind of not move as much on a bean bag. It's a good question. Got to be careful. Yeah, scratches. If you make a wrong scratch, you're gonna be in trouble. Yeah. Unless you can buff it out somehow. I don't buff it really. We were talking to a guy that made these picture frames, and he said that there's an eagle in the each corner of the picture frame, and he said, "What happens if you make a mistake?" And he said, "I don't make a mistake." Yeah. It's the same thing. If you accidentally scratch, you're in trouble. Start over or something. So that's it. I have my books and a few. I always bring a few Scrimshaws if anybody cares. I have a plastic item here. It's a bird, and another item here, but another plastic. And I have my books, and here's my contact information. If you ever, I do museums. I have a museum coming up Friday and Saturday in Sanford, where we have a live demo of 1830s Florida, including Scrimshaw. which I'll be at, and other museums. I have kids things that we try to teach the kids down in Kissimmee, and another museum that I go to demonstrate. So that's it. Thank you, Ms. Bias and the museum.
So thank you, Erwin, and thank you everybody for coming, and we hope to see you at the 3rd on 3rd on the 19th.
Thank you.
Erwin, can I ask you a question
Yeah.
about children's illustration?
Yeah.
So that's